So, you have to understand, my whole life was about the fog. Not in a depressing way, you know, not like I was some gloomy guy staring out a window all day. It was my job, my art. I'm a photographer, Alex, and my subject was Carl. That's what we call him here in San Francisco. Carl the Fog. It sounds friendly, I know. Quaint. And for a long time, that's exactly what he was to me. My apartment in Twin Peaks was perfect for it. High up, with a little balcony that faced east. Most mornings, I'd be up before the sun, leaning on the railing with a hot mug of coffee, just watching the city disappear. It was a slow, beautiful invasion. The fog would creep in from the ocean, a silent, rolling tide of gray and white. It would swallow the Golden Gate first, leaving just the tops of the towers like red islands in a cloud sea. Then it would pour over the hills, down the streets, muffling the sounds of the waking city until all you could hear was the distant, mournful horn of a ship out in the bay. It was my ritual: coffee, cold air on my face, and the click of my camera shutter. I had a blog, Carl's Embrace. Started as a personal project, just a place to put the pictures that I thought were too quiet for anyone else. Pictures of a single lamppost with its light diffused into a soft halo. Or the silhouette of a cable car emerging from the mist like a ghost. It was all about serenity, emptiness, the beauty of a world held in suspension. And people, surprisingly, liked it. It got popular. That morning was a good one. A perfect one, really. The fog was thick but had a kind of luminous quality, like the light was trapped inside it. I shot for 2 hours straight, just feeling the rhythm of it. Breathe in, click. Breathe out, click. When the light got too harsh, I went inside. The chill from the balcony still clung to my clothes. I made more coffee and sat down at my computer. There was an email waiting for me. It was from Cynthia, an editor at a big travel magazine. She was a fan of the blog. Subject: photo selections for Misty Mornings feature. Body: Alex, these are stunning. Absolutely stunning. The one of the Transamerica Pyramid with just the tip visible? Poetic. We're running it as a full-page opener. The team is thrilled. You have a real gift for finding the soul in the silence. Let me know when you have the invoice ready. Best, I smiled. It was nice to be appreciated. It was validation, you know? Proof that spending my mornings freezing on a balcony wasn't just a weird obsession. I typed back a quick reply, thanking her and telling her the invoice was on its way. The conversation was always professional, a little distant. I liked it that way. My work was where I connected with people. The rest of the time, I was mostly on my own. It wasn't lonely, it was just focused. The fog was my collaborator, and it was all the company I really needed. Feeling good, feeling productive, I decided to put up a new post. I'd been holding onto a shot for a few weeks, waiting for the right mood. It was a photo of the Golden Gate Bridge, but taken from an unusual angle, far away from the usual tourist spots. It was a wide, panoramic shot. The bridge was just a sliver of red, almost entirely consumed by a massive bank of fog that looked like a slow-motion avalanche. It was one of my favorites. It made the most famous landmark in the city look small and vulnerable. I uploaded the image and started typing. I always wrote a little something to go with the photos. Title: Figures in the Fog. Carl doesn't just hide the city, he recasts it. He turns familiar shapes into mysteries. A bridge becomes a rumor. A skyscraper, the ghost of a mountain. Sometimes, if you look long enough into the gray, the fog plays tricks on you. It creates figures in the mist, phantoms born from light and shadow that are there one moment and gone the next. They're just shapes, of course. Pareidolia, the mind trying to find patterns in the chaos. But for a second, they feel real. For a second, you're not alone out there in the quiet. I read it over. Yeah, that felt right. Poetic, a little moody. It fit the picture. I hit publish and leaned back in my chair, taking a sip of coffee. I watched the little page view counter tick up. 1, then 5, then 20. Good. People were seeing it. I opened the post on the live blog to see how it looked. The image loaded, crisp and clean. My eyes scanned it, checking the composition, the colors. Out of habit, I moved my cursor over the image. My laptop had a feature where you could zoom in just by hovering. I drifted over the bridge, the water, the thick wall of cloud. And then my cursor passed over a dark spot on the far left side of the frame, on a small, rocky outcropping that jutted out over the water. A place you weren't really supposed to go. The view magnified, and I froze. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a shadow, it was a person. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart giving a little thump. That was odd. I never had people in my shots. It was a rule. It ruined the emptiness, the silence. This person was tiny in the frame, so small I hadn't even noticed them during editing. I zoomed in as far as I could, the image starting to pixelate. It was a figure, standing completely still, ramrod straight. They were wearing dark clothes, so they were almost a silhouette against the gray fog. But something was wrong, incredibly wrong. They weren't holding a camera. They weren't leaning against anything or looking out at the view. Their posture was impossibly rigid, like a mannequin. And they weren't facing the bridge. They weren't facing the sea. They were facing me, or, to be precise, they were facing the exact spot where I had been standing with my camera. A chill, completely unrelated to the morning air, snaked its way up my spine. Come on, Alex, I told myself. It's a coincidence. It's a huge park. Someone else was out taking pictures, or just thinking. People do that. They get up early. They go to weird spots. But the longer I looked, the more unsettling it became. There was no sense of life to the figure. No casual slump of the shoulders. No turn of the head. It was just there. Planted, an unnatural piece of punctuation in the landscape. It was like someone had edited a stock photo of a person and just dropped it into my picture. But this was my photo. I took it. That person was there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were a birdwatcher with binoculars, and from this distance, it just looked like they were staring at me. Maybe they were doing yoga and I caught them in a Tadasana pose. It was ridiculous, but I was grasping at straws. The title I had just written, Figures in the Fog, suddenly felt weirdly prophetic. And not in a good way. The phantom I'd written about, it felt like I'd accidentally captured a real one. I felt a sudden, powerful urge to delete the post. To just take it down and pretend I never saw it. It felt contaminated. My art, my quiet, serene space, had been invaded by this wrongness. But that was crazy, right? Deleting a post because some rondo was standing in a weird way? Cynthia from the magazine would think I was a professional. My followers would see me as an artist. They didn't see what I saw. To them, it was just a landscape. I forced myself to take a deep breath. I closed the tab. Then I shut the laptop. But the image was burned into my mind. The wide, gray emptiness of the fog, and in the corner, that one small, dark, vertical line. That rigid, patient, watchful shape. I walked over to the balcony door and looked out. The fog was still there, thick as ever, pressing against the glass. It didn't look like a comforting embrace anymore. It looked like a curtain. I found myself scanning the rooftops of the buildings across the way, half expecting to see a dark figure standing there, watching my window. It's nothing, I told myself, the words feeling hollow. It's just a coincidence. Just a guy in a photo. But as I stood there, staring into the impenetrable white, I couldn't shake the feeling. The gnawing, creeping certainty that when I was out there watching the fog, something in the fog had been watching me back. The funny thing about fear, real gut-level fear, is how quickly your brain tries to bury it. For a few days after that picture, the one with the figure on the rocks, I was a wreck. I kept the balcony door locked. I found myself double-checking the locks on my front door before I went to bed, which is something I'd never done. I was jumpy. A car backfiring on the street below made me flinch. But then a day passed, then two, then a week. And nothing happened. The world didn't end. No strange knocks on the door. No more weird figures in the fog. Life just kept going. Cynthia at the magazine sent another email, this time asking if I had a new series in the works. My blog stats were higher than ever after the Figures in the Fog post. Ironically, people loved the title and the little write-up. They called it hauntingly beautiful. None of the hundreds of comments mentioned the tiny, upright speck of a person in the corner of the frame. Nobody saw it, only me. So, you see, it became easy to rationalize. My brain, desperate for normalcy, began to file the incident away. It was a fluke, a one-in-a-million coincidence. Just some weirdo out for a very early, very strange walk. San Francisco is full of them, right? It became an anecdote I might one day tell a friend, a weird little footnote in my career. The fear receded, leaving just a faint, chalky outline of itself. About 3 weeks later, I was feeling good again. I was feeling creative. The fog was rolling in thick that morning, a proper soupy mess, the kind that swallows sound and light. It was perfect. I decided not to shoot from my balcony. I wanted something different, something with a bit more history. I packed my gear, grabbed my travel mug of coffee, and drove out to the coast, to the ruins of the Sutro Baths. If you've never been, it's a strange and beautiful place. It used to be this massive, opulent public bathhouse in the late 1800s, all glass and steel and 7 different swimming pools. It burned down in the 60s, and now all that's left are the concrete foundations, these crumbling walls and empty pools that fill with seawater at high tide. It looks like the ruins of some ancient, forgotten civilization, especially in the fog. It's majestic and eerie and absolutely perfect for what I do. The air was cold and heavy with salt. The only sound was the distant boom of waves crashing against the cliffs below, a muffled, rhythmic heartbeat. I set up my tripod on the edge of what used to be the main promenade, looking down into the labyrinth of concrete walls. The fog was so dense, it swirled around the ruins like dry ice in a cauldron. A few gulls cried out from somewhere in the white void, their calls sounding thin and lonely. I felt that old thrill, that familiar artistic buzz. This was my element. This was my church. I was in control again. The camera felt like an extension of my own eye. I worked for over an hour, moving from spot to spot, capturing the way the mist clung to the broken concrete, how it made the sharp edges of the ruins look soft and dreamlike. I was getting incredible shots. I could feel it, the kind of photos that make you feel the damp on your own skin, that make you hear the silence. There was no one else around. It was just me, the ruins, and Carl. The way it was supposed to be. I got back to my apartment around 9, feeling triumphant. The chill of the coast was still deep in my bones, but I was buzzing with that post-shoot high. I dumped my camera bag on the floor, kicked off my damp boots, and went straight to my computer. Couldn't wait to see what I captured. I plugged the SD card into the reader, the little blue light blinking as the files transferred. A folder full of new images populated the screen. I opened the first one. Yes, it was good. The composition was spot on, the light diffused perfectly through the fog. I started clicking through them, one by one. The ritual was always the same. First, a quick pass to flag the keepers. Then a second, more detailed pass for culling the near misses. Then the editing began. Click. A shot of a crumbling archway, looking like a gateway to nowhere. Nice. Flagged. Click. A close-up of saltwater pooling in a cracked basin, the surface reflecting the white sky. Moody. Flagged. Click. Another wider shot, showing the scale of the main foundation, a jagged concrete skeleton half swallowed by the fog. It was one of the last shots I took, from a slightly higher vantage point I'd scrambled up to. My eye was drawn to a set of 3 parallel concrete walls in the center of the frame, their tops disappearing into the mist. It was a strong, graphic image. Definitely a keeper. I went to flag it, my finger hovering over the key. But my eyes caught on something. A patch of darkness in the space between 2 of the walls. It was probably just a shadow, I thought, my throat suddenly dry. A weird trick of the light where the fog was thinner. But it was distinct. It had a shape, an upright shape. No, the word was a whisper in my own head. No, it can't be. My hand, now trembling slightly, moved the mouse. I zoomed in. The image expanded, the pixels sharpening. The patch of darkness resolved itself. It wasn't a shadow, it was a person. My blood ran cold, the kind of cold that starts in your stomach and spreads to your fingertips in a nauseating wave. It was standing there, in the heart of the ruins. Perfectly still, ramrod straight, dressed in dark clothes. It was half hidden behind one of the concrete walls, as if peeking out. I told myself to breathe. Coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. Someone else was out there. A tourist. Another photographer. It's a public park, for God's sake. People are allowed to be there. But I had been there for over an hour. I had walked all over that area. I hadn't seen a soul. I hadn't heard a single footstep besides my own. The place had been dead silent. The stillness, the absolute emptiness, was the whole reason I was there. I would have noticed someone. I should have noticed someone. With a shaking hand, I navigated to the folder with my older photos. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I found the figures in the fog image, the one of the Golden Gate. I opened it in a new window. I dragged it next to the new photo from the baths. My desktop now showed 2 images, side by side. On the left, a sliver of red bridge against a sea of gray, with a tiny, distant figure on a rocky outcrop. On the right, the gray skeleton of the Sutro Baths, with a figure partially hidden between 2 concrete walls. It was the same, the posture was identical, unnaturally rigid, the clothes were the same dark, indistinct mass. But there was one horrifying, soul-crushing difference. In this new photo, it was closer. Much, much closer. In the Golden Gate photo, the figure was so far away it was little more than a smudge, a collection of dark pixels. But in this new one, I zoomed in as far as the resolution would allow. The image became a mosaic of squares, but I could see more. I could see the suggestion of a long coat. I could see the stiff set of the shoulders. And I could see the head, tilted just so. It wasn't looking at the ruins. It wasn't looking out to sea. It was looking directly at the spot where I had been standing. Directly at my camera. The air in my apartment suddenly felt thick and suffocating. The low hum of my computer was a roar in my ears. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. This was impossible. How could anyone know where I was going to be? I hadn't told anyone. I decided to go to Sutro Baths on a whim, 30 minutes before I left my apartment. A thought, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, pierced through my panic. It followed me, or it knew where I would be. I pushed my chair back from the desk so forcefully it banged into the wall. I stood up, pacing the small space of my living room, running my hands through my hair. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. I went to my bookshelf and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It was my personal journal, something I rarely wrote in. I flipped to a blank page, my hand shaking so badly that my writing was barely a scrawl. It was there again. I wrote, the pen digging into the paper. Sutro Baths, in the fog, same stance, same goddamn figure, but closer this time. I can almost see. I don't know what I can see. How? I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anyone. It's like it knows where I'm going to be. It's waiting for me. This isn't a coincidence anymore. I slammed the notebook shut. My gaze shot around my apartment. The big windows, the balcony door. The things that once represented my connection to the outside, to my art, now felt like vulnerabilities. They were just panes of glass. I walked over and yanked the blinds shut, plunging the room into dim, artificial light. I went to the balcony door and checked the lock, then engaged the secondary deadbolt I rarely use. I did the same to my front door. My sanctuary had become a trap. My passion, the fog, was now its accomplice. It wasn't Carl's embrace anymore. It was a shroud, a place for something to hide, to watch, to get closer. I stood there in the middle of my locked-down, darkened apartment, the only light coming from the two horrifying images still glowing on my computer screen. The silence was absolute. I looked towards the covered windows, towards the impenetrable white world on the other side. A question formed in my mind, a question so full of dread it felt like a physical weight in my chest. Who are you, and what in God's name do you want from me? I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I think I drifted off for maybe an hour at a time, slumped in my desk chair, only to jerk awake with my heart hammering. The two images from my monitor burned onto the inside of my eyelids. The distant figure, the closer figure. My mind kept playing a horrifying slideshow, zooming in, sharpening the edges, trying to will a face into existence from that dark, pixelated shape. Around 3 a.m., in a fit of what I can only describe as desperate, magical thinking, I dragged both photos into the trash bin on my computer. Then I emptied the trash. I even ran a disk utility to securely erase the free space, a function I usually only used when selling an old hard drive. As if deleting the data could somehow delete the reality. As if it could unring the bell. It was stupid, I know. But in that moment, it felt like the only thing I had any control over. The next few days were a special kind of hell. My apartment, once my sanctuary and my studio, now felt like a cage. A glass cage, to be specific. I kept the blinds drawn day and night. The loss of natural light made the place feel stuffy and small, a tomb. Every creak of the old building, every footstep in the hall outside my door, every distant siren was a potential threat. I started checking the locks obsessively. The deadbolt on the front door, the secondary bolt on the balcony sliding door. I'd check them, walk away, and 5 minutes later a worm of doubt would burrow into my brain. Did I really turn it all the way? And I'd have to go back and check again. My knuckles were raw from twisting the metal knobs. My passion, my entire professional identity, became a source of dread. When I saw the fog rolling in, that thick, beautiful blanket I used to chase with my camera, my stomach would clench. Carl the fog wasn't a muse anymore. He was an accomplice, a vast, white curtain for my own personal boogeyman to hide behind. I stopped looking at my blog. I ignored Cynthia's emails. The idea of picking up my camera made my hands feel cold and clammy. This went on for about a week. A week of stale air, microwave dinners, and the low hum of the refrigerator for company. I was living like a hermit, a prisoner in my own home. And slowly, just like before, the rational part of my brain started to fight back. It had to. You can't live at that level of high alert forever. You either snap or you adapt. It's just pictures, Alex, I tell myself, pacing the length of my small living room. 2 weird pictures. That's all. You deleted them. It's over. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. Some art student with too much time on their hands who'd figured out my shooting habits. It was a stretch, a huge one, but it was better than the alternative. The alternative was that something unnatural, something that defied logic, had singled me out. And that was a thought my mind simply refused to entertain for long periods. So, I started to force a new normal. I opened the blinds during the day, even if I avoided looking down at the street for too long. I answered one of Cynthia's emails with a vague excuse about working on a new, private project. I even cleaned my kitchen. Anything to feel normal again. Anything to feel in control. It was on one of those mornings, a Tuesday I think, that I woke up to a world that had vanished. The light coming through my window was different. It wasn't the gray, flat light of an overcast day. It was a dense, luminous white. I got out of bed and walked over to the window, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. I pulled up the blinds. And I saw nothing. It was the thickest fog I had ever seen in my life. It wasn't just foggy, it was absolute. A wall of white, pressed right up against the glass. It completely erased the city. No buildings opposite, no streetlights, no sky. It was like my apartment was floating in an infinite sea of milk. The silence was the most unsettling part. Usually, even in the fog, you hear the muffled sounds of the city, a distant horn, the rumble of a cable car. But now, there was nothing. The fog had swallowed all sound. It felt personal, like it was here for me. An irrational wave of claustrophobia washed over me. I felt a desperate need for fresh air, to prove to myself that the world was still out there beyond that white wall. My heart started beating a little faster. The balcony. I could just step out onto the balcony for a second. I walked over to the sliding glass door. My hand hesitated over the lock. The double bolt I'd been checking so religiously. I took a breath. This was stupid. I was being stupid. I was in my own apartment, on the 4th floor. I was safe. Forcing my hand to be steady, I twisted the main lock, then slid the heavy secondary bolt out of its housing. It made a loud, grating sccccchhhk in the profound silence. I slid the door open a few feet. A swirl of cold, damp air immediately filled the room, carrying a heavy smell of wet earth and salt. It was chilling, but it was real. I took a step out onto the concrete slab of the balcony, my bare feet instantly prickling from the cold. The fog was so thick I could feel the moisture condensing on my face and arms. It moved in slow, lazy currents around me. I couldn't see the railing just a few feet in front of me. My eyes scanned the familiar space. My little metal table and 2 chairs, beaded with moisture. The terracotta pot where my succulent had long since given up the ghost. And the spot right by the corner where the view of the bay was best. The spot where my tripod always stood. And that's when I saw it. At first, my brain didn't process it. It was just a dark shape on the light gray concrete. A discoloration, but it wasn't a random splotch. It had a definite shape. A shape my mind recognized with a jolt of pure, electric terror. It was a footprint, a single, wet footprint. The clear, unmistakable outline of a large shoe or boot, pointing directly toward the glass door I had just opened. It was located precisely, exactly, where I always placed the front leg of my tripod. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. My blood went icy cold. I stood frozen, my bare feet inches from it, staring. It couldn't be. It was impossible. My mind raced, clawing for a logical explanation. The rain? No, the balcony has a deep overhang. Rain never reached this far in. I knew that for a fact. And besides, it was a single, isolated print. There were no other drops, no other smudges, just this one perfect, solitary mark. My own footprint from a previous day? No, I always wore boots when I was shooting, but this print was larger than my size. And it was wet, soaking wet, as if someone had stepped out of a river and then directly onto my balcony. But there was no trail leading to it. It was just there. As if the person had materialized in that one spot, stood for a moment, and then vanished. With a surge of adrenaline, I backed away, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete. I stumbled back into my apartment and slammed the glass door shut. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grasp the lock. I twisted it, then I fumbled with the deadbolt, jamming it home. The sound echoed in the silent, fog-filled room. I stood there, panting, my back pressed against the wall, staring out at the balcony through the glass. At the footprint, the evidence of an impossible intrusion. Someone had been out there, not down on the street, not on a distant hill. They had been here, on my balcony, inches from my living room, inches from where I slept. My sanctuary hadn't just been violated, it had been conquered. The locks, the bolts, they were a joke. How? The question screamed in my head. How did they get up here? There's no fire escape on this side of the building. The apartment below me belonged to a quiet old woman. It was a sheer brick wall 4 stories down to the pavement. It made no sense. It was a physical, logistical impossibility. And yet, the proof was right there. A dark, wet stain on the concrete. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, just staring. Minutes? An hour? The fog outside didn't move. It was a constant, suffocating presence. Finally, a new kind of fear pushed through the paralysis. I couldn't leave it there. I couldn't live with that thing, that proof, sitting right outside my window. I had to get rid of it. I went to the kitchen, my movements jerky and robotic. I grabbed a roll of paper towels and the spray bottle of all-purpose cleaner. I went back to the door. Unlocking it again felt like deliberately inviting a monster into my house. My hand trembled as I slid it open just enough to squeeze through. I knelt on the cold concrete. The footprint was even clearer up close. I could see the tread pattern, a deep, military-style lug sole. It was long and narrow. I sprayed the cleaner directly onto it. The chemicals foamed up, blurring the edges of the print. I took a wad of paper towels and started scrubbing, hard. I scrubbed until the dark stain was gone, and then I kept scrubbing, trying to erase the ghost of it, the memory of it, from the very pores of the concrete. I wiped it dry, then wiped it again. When I was done, the spot was cleaner than the rest of the balcony. It stood out, a pale, sterile patch of nothing. I retreated back inside, locking everything up tight again. I threw the wet paper towels in the trash and buried them under coffee grounds and junk mail. I stood in the middle of my living room, shaking. The physical evidence was gone, but the knowledge of it was seared into my brain. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague paranoia. It was a certainty. The figure in the photos wasn't just a follower. It wasn't just a watcher. It was an infiltrator. It could get to me. It could defy locks and 4-story drops. It could stand in the one place I considered mine, cloaked in the fog, and I would never even know. I sank onto my couch, wrapping my arms around myself. I stared at the clean patch on my balcony through the glass, my mind a blank hum of static and fear. The silence in the apartment was deafening. It had been breached. Nothing was safe anymore, and in that dead silence, my phone, sitting on the coffee table, suddenly vibrated against the wood. The sound was so loud, so violent, it made me cry out. I flinched away from it as if it were a venomous snake. The screen lit up. It was a notification banner, clear and sharp in the dim light of my shuttered apartment. An email notification from my blog. It read, "Carl's Embrace, you have one new comment on your post, Figures in the Fog." My phone lay on the coffee table, a black rectangle of glass and plastic that had just declared war on the silence in my apartment. The vibration wasn't just a sound, it was a physical jolt, a miniature earthquake that resonated through the cheap wood of the table, up through the floorboards, and into the soles of my feet. I actually yelled, not a scream of terror, just a short, sharp bark of pure, startled adrenaline. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The screen was lit up, glowing in the oppressive gloom of the room I had turned into my cave. It was an email notification. My blog platform, Carl's Embrace. You have one new comment on your post, Figures in the Fog. Figures in the Fog. Not a new post, not some random musing from a week ago. It was on the post. The original sin, the one that had started this whole thing. A part of my brain, the logical, self-preservation part, screamed at me. Don't look, delete the email, throw the phone against the wall. It's bait, it's a trap, but you know how it is. It's like being told not to think about a pink elephant. The warning itself is the trigger. The curiosity was a physical thing, a hook in my gut, pulling me forward. The need to know was more powerful than the fear of what I might find. My body moved before my mind consented. I pushed myself off the couch, my joints stiff. Each step felt heavy, like I was wading through deep water. I stood over the coffee table, looking down at the screen. The notification had vanished, leaving the screen dark again. It was waiting. I reached out, my hand shaking so badly I had to steady it with my other one, and picked it up. My thumb hovered over the power button. This was the last moment of not knowing, the last moment of the specific kind of dread I was currently feeling. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever came next would be worse. I pressed the button. The screen flared to life. I swiped up, my thumb slick with sweat, and tapped the email icon. There it was, an anonymous user. The comment was short, deceptively simple. I read it once, and the words didn't quite parse. I read it again, and the blood in my veins turned to ice water. The photo from 5:14 a.m. is beautiful. Perfect light, but you should clean your lens, there's a small scratch on the edge. I sank back onto the edge of the couch, the phone still clutched in my hand. My mind snagged on two things, two impossibly sharp points in that short, simple sentence. First, the time, 5:14 a.m. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't an approximation. It was the exact, minute-perfect timestamp. That wasn't information you could get from looking at the photo on the blog. The website strips that kind of data out when you upload an image. That kind of information, the EXIF data, only exists in one place, the original, high-resolution file. The one on my hard drive. The one stored in my encrypted cloud backup. My throat went dry. This wasn't just someone seeing my work online. This wasn't someone following my blog. This was someone who had access to my source files. My computer, which I was staring at right now, asleep on my desk. My private, password-protected space. Has he been in here? Or had he hacked me? Which was worse, a physical intrusion or a digital one that could be happening from anywhere in the world, at any time? My mind was reeling, trying to process the violation, but the second part of the comment slammed into me before I could even catch my breath. A small scratch on the edge. No, impossible. My gear was my life. I babied my lenses more than I babied myself. I cleaned them before and after every single shoot with microfiber cloths and special solutions. I knew every ounce, every gear turn, every click of my camera. My main lens, a 24 to 70mm f2.8, was my pride and joy. It was perfect, flawless. There was no scratch. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. A lucky guess designed to screw with my head. And it was working. I threw the phone onto the couch cushion and scrambled over to my gear bag in the corner. My hands were fumbling, clumsy, as I unzipped the main compartment. There it was, my camera, the lens attached. I ripped the lens cap off. I held it up to the dim light filtering through the blinds. Nothing. The glass looked like a perfect, black pool. See? I told myself, a wave of desperate relief washing over me. He's just messing with you. A psycho with good guessing skills. But I couldn't let it go. I took the camera over to my desk and switched on the powerful, articulating lamp I used for editing. I angled the bright, white light directly onto the lens. I tilted the lens back and forth, watching the light skate across its curved surface. I scanned the edges, meticulously. And then, I saw it. It wasn't a scratch, not in the way you'd think of a key scratching a car door. It was a hairline, less than a millimeter long. Faint, ghostly, and right on the extreme outer edge of the glass, almost hidden by the plastic housing. You would never, ever see it in a photo unless you were a pixel-peeping lunatic. You would never even see it on the lens itself unless you were looking for it, under a direct, bright light, at the perfect angle. I had never seen it before. I let out a sound that was half a sob, half a gasp. I stumbled back from the desk, one hand covering my mouth. This changed everything. This wasn't a hack. A hack could explain the timestamp. But this wasn't digital. This was physical. This was granular. This was a detail so intimate, so specific to the tool of my trade, that there were only two ways he could know about it. Either he had stood close enough to me while I was shooting, close enough to see that microscopic flaw on my camera in the pre-dawn light, a proximity I couldn't even begin to imagine without being aware of him. Or, he had held it. He had been in my apartment, picked up my camera from its bag, and examined it. The wet footprint on the balcony. The impossible access. He had been here. He had stood in my space, breathed my air, and touched my things. He had looked at the city through my viewfinder, maybe even put his eye where my eye goes. The thought was so violating it made me want to be sick. The scratch wasn't a flaw in the glass. It was his signature, a message left just for me, saying, I can get to anything. I can see everything, even the things you don't see yourself. My frantic, panicked energy from before was gone. It was replaced by a cold, heavy dread, a feeling of utter helplessness. He wasn't just watching me from a distance anymore. He wasn't just a figure in the fog. He was inside. He was in my hard drive, in my gear, in my head. My first coherent thought was to erase the comment. A futile, symbolic gesture. I lunged for the phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I navigated to the blog's admin panel, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I found the comment. I stared at the anonymous username, the meaningless string of numbers and letters, and I hit delete. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this comment? My laugh was a harsh, broken sound in the quiet room. Permanently, as if I could delete it from my memory. I hit yes. Then I went into the settings. I found the privacy options. With 3 frantic taps, I switched my entire blog, my entire body of work from the last 5 years, from public to private. A digital wall, another useless lock on a door that had already been kicked wide open. It was too late. The message had been delivered. The point had been made. He didn't need the blog to be public anymore. He had a direct line. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state. I didn't eat. I paced the length of my small apartment, from the front door to the balcony door and back, over and over, wearing a path in the hardwood floor. Every sound from the hallway, every car horn from the street below, sent a jolt of electricity through me. The fog, which had started to thin, began to roll back in as evening approached, pressing against my windows again. It wasn't Carl the fog anymore. It was his fog, his accomplice. Night fell. I didn't turn on any lights. I sat on the floor in the living room, my back against the couch, facing the balcony door. The city outside was gone, erased by the thick, white blanket. My apartment was a tiny, dim box floating in a void. There was no sound. The fog muffled everything. In my lap, I held my camera. Not for art, not for work. I held it because it was heavy and solid. I had taken the lens off and set it aside. I didn't want to touch it. I just held the camera body, my fingers wrapped tight around the grip. In the dark, it felt less like a tool and more like a rock. A weapon. It was pathetic, but it was all I had. I sat there for hours. Just sitting, waiting. For what? I didn't know. My senses were on a hair trigger. My ears strained to catch any sound that was out of place. My breathing was shallow. My muscles were coiled tight. And then I heard it. It was so faint, I thought I'd imagined it. A soft, sharp sound from the direction of the balcony. Click. It wasn't the creak of the old building settling. It wasn't the wind. It was a precise, metallic sound. The sound of a fingernail tapping on glass, perhaps. Or something harder. The sound of a small piece of metal making contact with the window pane. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. I held my breath, listening into the suffocating silence. Nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Maybe I did imagine it. Paranoia, my mind playing tricks on me after the day I'd had. I started to let my breath out, a slow, shaky exhale. Click. TCK click. This time, it was unmistakable. It was right there, at the glass door. Someone was on my balcony. Someone was out there in the fog, 4 stories up, standing in the exact spot where the footprint had been. And they were tapping on my window. It wasn't a sound you could place at first. It was just wrong. A tiny, sharp little noise that didn't belong in the muffled, cotton wool world the fog had created. My brain, which was already running on fumes and pure adrenaline, scrambled to categorize it. A branch hitting the glass? No trees. A bird? Not at this time of night, not in this soup. I stayed completely still, my back pressed hard against the couch. My knuckles were white where they gripped the camera body. It felt stupidly small in my hands now. Useless. The sound had come from the balcony. I knew it had. The same direction as the footprint. The same direction as everything. And then it came again. TCK click. Scrape. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was the sound of something hard and pointed, like a piece of metal, sliding against the glass of the balcony door. The scrape was slow, deliberate. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't the wind. It was a person. A person was on my balcony. 4 stories up. My breath caught in my throat. The logical part of me screamed that this was impossible. The fire escape was on the other side of the building. The walls were sheer brick. There was no way up. But logic had checked out of my apartment hours ago, right around the time I found the scratch on my lens. All that was left was a raw, animal certainty. He was out there. The silence that followed the scrape was somehow worse than the sound itself. It was heavy, expectant. I could feel him out there, standing in the thick, white nothingness, just waiting. The fog, my beautiful, moody Carl, had become his cloak. It had swallowed the city, swallowed my view, and now it was pressing against the glass, delivering this monster to my door. My body started moving on its own. I don't know why. It's the stupidest thing you do in a horror movie, right? You move towards the sound. But I had to see. I had to know if I was truly losing my mind or if this was real. My feet, in just socks, made no sound on the hardwood floor. I pushed myself up from the ground, my joints screaming in protest. The camera body was still in my right hand, a cold, dense weight. I took one step, then another. The world had shrunk to the space between me and that glass door. The fog outside was absolute. It wasn't just misty or hazy, it was a solid white wall. It looked like the building had been dropped into a giant vat of milk. I couldn't see the railing of my own balcony, couldn't see the dim orange glow of the streetlights below. There was nothing, just whiteness. It was like looking into oblivion. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, maybe 5 feet from the glass, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. My own reflection was a ghostly, terrified stranger looking back at me. I could see the wide, dark circles of my eyes, the pale sheen of sweat on my forehead. See? A tiny, rational voice whispered in my head. Nothing. There's nothing there. It was a sound from another apartment, echoing weirdly. It was a pipe settling. You're exhausted. You're terrorizing yourself. I almost believed it. I was about to let out the breath I'd been holding, about to take a step back, maybe even laugh at my own paranoia. And then it happened. A hand slapped against the glass. It wasn't a tentative tap. It was a hard, wet thump that vibrated through the floor. It appeared out of the white void like a magic trick from hell. The hand was pale, the fingers spread wide, pressing flat against the pane right at my eye level. It was drenched, raindrops or condensation clinging to the skin, making it glisten in the dim light of my living room. For a split second, my mind just refused to process it. It was too impossible, a disembodied hand, floating in the nothingness. Then, slowly, the hand began to slide downwards. It left a smeared, streaky trail of moisture on the glass, a grotesque snail's trail. As it moved, a shape began to resolve behind it, a dark patch in the white fog. A silhouette, a head, shoulders. He was right there. His face was only inches from the glass, but the fog and the darkness conspired to keep it a featureless mask. I couldn't see eyes or a mouth, just a vague, human-shaped darkness against the impossible white. He was real. He was on my balcony. And he was looking right at me. Time seemed to warp. I was paralyzed, pinned in place by that faceless stare. The hand reached the bottom of the glass panel and was gone. But the figure remained, a statue of pure menace. And then, I saw it move. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was a slow, deliberate shift. The silhouette leaned forward, closer to the door. Click. The sound was different now. Sharper, metallic. It came from the lock. The simple latch on the inside of the sliding door handle. Jiggle. Click. He was trying the lock. From the outside, he was fumbling with it, testing it, trying to find a way to slide the latch open. My mind finally rebooted. The paralysis shattered, replaced by a surge of pure, chemical panic that tasted like copper in my mouth. This wasn't a haunting. This wasn't about being watched. He was coming inside. No, I whispered. The sound was pathetic, a dry rasp. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the edge of a rug. I nearly went down. My eyes darted around the room, wild, desperate. What do I do? Call 911? By the time they got here, he'd be inside. My phone was on the couch, a million miles away. I needed something to fight with. Something now. The camera body in my hand was just a chunk of plastic. It was a rock, a pitiful rock. I could throw it, maybe, but then what? My gaze landed on the corner of the room, where I kept my main gear. The tripod. It was my professional-grade Manfrotto. Not one of those flimsy aluminum things. This one was carbon fiber and magnesium alloy. It was built like a tank. Collapsed, it was about 3 feet long. Extended, it was taller than me. And it was heavy, solid. Click, rattle, scrape. The sounds from the door were getting more frantic, more insistent. He was getting frustrated, or maybe he was getting closer. I didn't think, I just moved. I dropped the camera body onto the couch and lunged for the corner. My fumbling hands grabbed the tripod. The cold, textured metal was a shock to my system. I gripped the thickest leg like a baseball bat. It was unwieldy, but the weight of it was reassuring. It was real. It was something I could swing. Get away, I yelled. My voice cracked. It sounded thin and weak, even to my own ears. I'm calling the cops. Get the hell away from my door. There was no response from the shadow outside. The only answer was the sound. Click, clack, click. It was a new sound. A sound of progress. A sound that said he had figured something out. A shiver of absolute dread went down my spine. The lock. He was working the lock. I backed away from the door, putting the coffee table between me and him. I raised the tripod, holding it with both hands, my right hand near the base and my left higher up. I felt ludicrous, a photographer about to get into a life-or-death struggle with a monster from the fog, armed with a piece of camera equipment. My art, the thing I used to capture beauty, was now my last line of defense against the ugliest thing I had ever encountered. My entire world was now that glass door, the terrifying silhouette standing behind it, and the frantic, metallic scraping that was getting louder and more precise. He wasn't just jiggling it anymore. He was working it. I could hear the tiny, internal parts of the latch grinding against whatever tool he was using. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. My arms were shaking, not from the weight of the tripod, but from sheer terror. The fog pressed in, the silence of the city amplifying the tiny, awful sounds coming from my door. He was going to get in. In a few seconds, that door was going to slide open, and the barrier between me and the figure in the fog would be gone. I braced my feet, tightened my grip on the cold metal, and waited for the sound of the latch giving way. It was the only thing in the world I could hear. It was the sound of my life ending. The sound of the latch grinding. That was it. That was the line. Before that sound, there was a chance I was crazy, a chance this was all some elaborate, fog-induced hallucination. But that sound was real. It was metal on metal, precise and intentional. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock that had no keyhole. I was backing away, the tripod held out in front of me like some kind of primitive spear. It felt absurd. The weight was all wrong, the balance was off. I was a photographer, not a gladiator. My mind was just a loop of pure, white noise panic. He's coming in. He's coming in. He's coming in. My back hit the wall next to my gear shelves. The impact jolted me, and for a split second, the panic cleared, replaced by something else. It wasn't bravery, it was just instinct. My eyes, darting wildly around the room for anything at all, landed on the small, black box sitting on the top shelf. My Godox V1, my external flash. It wasn't a weapon, but it was powerful. I'd used it on shoots in the middle of the day to overpower the sun. It could turn noon into midnight with the right settings. At night, at full power, fired directly into someone's face, what would that do? The sound from the door changed. It was a soft pop. Not loud, but it was a sound of victory. The grinding stopped. A dead silence fell over the room. I knew what that meant. He'd done it. The latch was open. There was no time to think. It was pure muscle memory. I dropped the tripod. It hit the floor with a heavy, clattering thud that sounded like a bomb in the silence. And my hand shot out, grabbing the flash. My thumb found the power button, flicking it on. I didn't even look to see the screen light up. My other hand fumbled for the test button, the little red lightning bolt. It was a button I'd pressed 1,000 times without thinking. Now, my entire life depended on finding it. The glass door slid open. It didn't fly open. It slid just a foot, slowly, quietly. And the figure stepped through. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a ghost. He was just a man. Tall, dressed in dark, drenched clothes. The fog swirled in around his feet like a special effect. I still couldn't see his face. It was hidden in the deep shadow of a hood. He took one step into my living room, bringing the cold, wet smell of the fog inside with him. He was shutting the door behind him when I found the button. I raised the flash like a pistol, aimed it straight at the center of that dark hood, and pressed. The world vanished in a silent explosion of pure white light. It was blinding, a single frame of bleached-out reality. For that fraction of a second, every detail in the room was etched in stark black and white. The man was frozen, one hand on the door handle, his other just starting to come up. Then, darkness rushed back in, leaving a searing blue-green afterimage burned onto my retinas. A pained grunt came from the doorway. A real, human sound. My thumb was already pressing the button again. The flash had to recycle, but it was fast. A second later, pop. Another silent, white explosion. This time I saw him clearly in the flash. He was stumbling back, his hands flying up to his face. The hood fell away. I saw a pale face, dark eyes wide with shock and pain, not menace. He looked surprised, like he couldn't believe this was happening. Pop. He staggered back, tripping over the threshold of the balcony door. He reeled, completely disoriented, one hand still covering his eyes. The other flailed for balance. That's when my voice came back. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a raw, terrified scream, torn from the bottom of my lungs. Help! Somebody help me! He's in my apartment! Pop! I just kept hitting the button. The room was turning into a strobe-lit nightmare. Flash! Darkness! Flash! Darkness! He was on the balcony now, lurching away from the light, away from the noise. He glanced up, blinded, and I saw the lights in the apartment building across the way flick on. A window slid open. My other hand, the one not holding the flash, was grabbing the phone from the couch. My fingers were slick with sweat. I fumbled it twice before I got a grip. 911. My thumb jabbed at the screen. Pop. The man looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his face. Just a blankness. Then he turned and vaulted over my balcony railing. I scrambled to the door, expecting to hear a scream, a thud from 4 stories down. But there was nothing, just the thick, silent fog. He was gone, as if he'd just stepped off the edge of the world and dissolved into the white. The 911 operator was in my ear, her voice calm and repetitive. Sir, what is your location? Sir, are you there? I leaned against the doorframe, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. The flash was still in my hand, warm to the touch. He's gone, I stammered into the phone. He went over the balcony. The next hour was a blur of official procedure. 2 cops showed up, then 2 more. They were professional, calm. They took my statement. They searched the balcony with powerful flashlights that cut pale cones into the fog. They found nothing. No rope, no ladder, no sign of how he got up or how he got down. They found the jimmy marks on the latch, tiny scratches in the cheap metal. They dusted for prints on the glass, finding only my own terrified smudges and the long, streaky smear from his hand. They talked to the neighbors, who confirmed hearing me scream and seeing the flashing lights. But no one saw him. By the time they looked, there was only the fog. They treated it like a botched burglary. A weird one, sure. An athletic one, but ultimately just a crime that had been thwarted. They told me I'd done the right thing. They promised to patrol the area more frequently. And then they left. I was alone again in my apartment. The front door was bolted, chained, and I dragged a heavy armchair in front of it for good measure. I couldn't bring myself to close the balcony door. I just stood there, staring out at the fog, which was finally beginning to thin as the pre-dawn light seeped into the sky. The weeks that followed were hell. Not a dramatic, movie-like hell. A quiet, grinding one. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the building had me jumping. I stopped using the balcony. In fact, I kept the blinds permanently shut. Carl the Fog, my muse, my beautiful, moody companion, was now just a white curtain that heralded nothing but dread. I'd see it rolling in over Twin Peaks and my stomach would just clench. I didn't touch my cameras. My blog went silent. The thought of looking for shapes in the mist made me feel physically ill. I tried to rationalize it. A junkie, a mentally ill person. San Francisco has its share of both. Someone who was incredibly agile and incredibly high, who picked my apartment at random. It was a story. It was a plausible story. I told it to myself over and over, hoping that one day I'd actually believe it. About a month after the attack, I was starting to feel a sliver of my old self coming back. I was sleeping a few hours a night. I'd even answered an email from my editor. Normalcy was a distant shore, but I could at least see it. That's when the package arrived. It was small, about the size of a wallet, wrapped in plain brown paper and sitting just inside the mail slot of my front door. No stamps, no return address. It had been hand-delivered. My first thought was, it's him. I should call the police. I should throw it out. But I didn't. I just stood there in my hallway, heart hammering, staring at this little brown rectangle. Curiosity is a strange and powerful thing. It can override even the most primal survival instincts. With trembling hands, I tore the paper open. Inside was an SD card. A standard, black SanDisk Extreme Pro. The kind I used every day. There was nothing else. No note, no message, just the card. I stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, just holding it in my palm. My brain was screaming at me. Don't do it. Throw it away. Smash it with a hammer. But I couldn't. I was a photographer. An image is a piece of information. A story, and I had to know what the story was. I walked over to my laptop, my steps feeling heavy and numb. It was like watching someone else move. I slid the SD card into the reader slot. The little icon popped up on my desktop. I clicked it. One folder. Inside, one file. It wasn't a text document. It wasn't a video. It was an image file. _DSC0001.jpg . The default naming convention for a Nikon camera. My mouth was dry. I took a breath and double-clicked. The image loaded instantly, filling my screen. And my blood went cold. It was a photograph, a technically perfect photograph. The lighting was masterful, a single, dramatic key light from the left, creating deep shadows in all the right places. The composition was deliberate, following the rule of thirds. The focus was tack sharp. It was a beautiful, professional portrait. The subject was me. I was cowering by the couch. My face was a mask of pure terror, pale and slick with sweat, my mouth open in a scream the picture couldn't capture. In one hand, I was holding my phone to my ear. In the other, I was holding the Godox flash, pointed like a gun toward the balcony door. The flash from my own V1 was the key light, illuminating my terrified face. But that wasn't the part that made my world stop. It wasn't the image of my own fear. It was the angle. The photograph was taken from inside my living room. It was taken from the dark corner by the bookshelf. The corner I had been backed up against. The corner right behind me. While I was screaming, while I was on the phone, while I was blinding the man at the door, someone else had been in the room with me, standing in the shadows, holding a camera, and quietly taking my picture.